Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to be starting on week 4, and it is the halfway point pretty much for the semester. So you guys have made it halfway. Seems like everyone's been doing pretty well, and you have figured out turning in assignments. And I haven't really had too many questions anymore about how to submit things or anything like that. So it seems like everyone's kind of gotten the hang of it. This week, we're going to start the chapter that is called Avenues to Learning. It starts out by going over kind of the differences between online learning and classroom learning. And mainly, we go over this to be helpful not only to you all who are already in an online class, because there is a section that has a lot of good tips for success, but it's also good to kind of start this out because some of you, this may be the first online class you've ever taken. So it may be an experience for you that will make you want to take more online classes, or online classes isn't for everybody, so it may kind of drive you more towards trying to schedule face-to-face classes for yourself when you can. But it has a lot of good information that really makes it more understandable, especially for people that are not as experienced with the online classroom. So finish the reading. You've got about 5 sections here that you have to read before you get to your first activity. They're not too terribly long, and some of them have some actual videos embedded. You don't have to click on a link. You'll just see the video within the text. I'm going to go ahead and admit right now that last summer when we put this resource together, there was about 5 or 6 of us professors that teach college life and strategies that all came together with the director of our program. And we were the ones that basically wrote this resource for you guys. So this is the beginning of this chapter is the section that I wrote. So all of this information here, all the way down for the e-learning, this is all the section that I wrote last summer for this. So I'm admitting this now, and I'm hoping that this section is not too terrible for you all to read because this is the one that I wrote. So, basically, once you get all of this reading completed and you finish this online etiquette reading, you're going to do your first activity. It's called My Grade is Wrong, and it's a chance for you to practice writing an email to your professor. It's going to be a scenario that I give you, and you're going to be writing an email to a professor, and your goal, your task is to try to be as academically professional as possible, which means your tone, you need to watch your tone. You need to try to be respectful. You're writing this email to a professor to try to dispute a grade that you think that they graded incorrectly. And so you're wanting to watch your tone. You're wanting to look at your grammar, your punctuation. You want to make sure you capitalize the beginning of your sentences. You're basically wanting to show that professor that not only are you, inquiring about your grade respectfully, but you also want to show them that, you are taking the time to proofread your reading. You're making sure you're sending them an email that doesn't have a lot of grammatical errors, because even in the academic setting, it's a good place for you to practice, because when you get into your career, or even if you are partially in your career already, you probably have to do a lot of email communication with fellow coworkers, managers, things like that. And you don't want to send off an email to a manager that has a lot of grammatical errors that maybe you typed all in caps or something like that, because it's not going, they may not tell you, but they're going to look at that and they're going to see things like that, because your main communication with them is over email. And it would just be like if you were doing face-to-face, if you couldn't speak to them and say what it is that you wanted to say, and you were getting overly emotional if there was an issue going on or whatever, it's hard enough to be able to communicate face-to-face. But when you do it online, you have to understand a lot of things, such as, for example, people can't always tell what your tone is. So sometimes people come off being very rude in an email, and they're not meaning to be, but it's just the way that they typed it up, what words they used, how they structure their sentences. A lot of times that has the opposite effect of what you're trying to get at. So this is your opportunity to try to practice writing something professional where you're trying to dispute your grade, and it's obviously an issue and you might be upset about it, but you're trying to send off an email to your professor without coming off as rude, without sending something to them that has a lot of, text speak. Like if you were going to write a text message to someone, you want to use full sentences, you want to watch your grammar, your punctuation, all of that. And it does have some I basically ask you to write a certain amount of sentences, and I do ask from here on out for assignments. If I ask you to write a certain amount of sentences, if I ask you to be thorough or detailed, please do so, because there are a few people in our class that like to write very short and sweet answers to a lot of the assignments that we've done so far. And most of the time, my best word of advice to you is to write more rather than less, because if you try to write a very, very short answer, it looks like you haven't really put much thought into it. And it doesn't look like you're really being very thorough about trying to answer something and really think about the issue or the topic that you're writing about. So in this assignment, I'm asking you to be very thorough, write at least 5 sentences. Basically, you're writing a full paragraph. And you have some information there in that assignment that actually kind of gives you some structure to what it is that you need to be writing. So just make sure you read over that real carefully, and just, like I said, make sure your answer is well thought out, thorough, and be detailed. And then you can send that off. And then you're going to read a couple of other sections after that. The websites and plagiarism is a really good section, especially for anyone that's not really done a lot of online classes. It has a lot to do with online research, because, nowadays, most of us don't necessarily go to the library and check out a book and do our research that way. We get on the internet. And a lot of people are experienced with this, but then there's a lot of people too that are not. They don't understand that not every website is legitimate. Not every website is reliable for information, especially in the academic setting. You want to be very careful about where you're getting your information from. And on top of that, you want to be very careful that you are citing everything where you got your information, because you don't want to be accused of plagiarism, especially in college, because if a professor runs your papers or, some other assignment through one of the many programs that they have now that can actually scan your paper to see if you have plagiarized, you can get in a lot of trouble in college if you do not cite your work properly. So anytime you take any information off of any website, anything like that, and you're using those words, even if you change the sentence to be more in your own language, but the ideas that you got came from another source, you still need to cite it. So I do put on here, I'll go ahead and click on this activity just to kind of show you a couple of things. When you do the reading in that section that says websites and plagiarism, if you have never done APA style writing before, I actually give you a link in that reading for an APA tip sheet, and you can click on it and it will give you all of the different ways that you can basically cite information within your actual text that you're typing. And then it also gives you information on how to make your reference page. So you can look over that. It's a very simplified version of APA. And I chose that because if any of you have ever picked up an APA manual before, it's not fun. So yes, when I did my graduate work, I basically had my large APA manual to cite all my work, because it was very important with a lot of the research that I had to do for my degrees, that you had to be very thorough with your citations, and the APA manual is not easy to use. And I found this tip sheet several years ago, and I've been giving it to my students pretty much for the last 3 or 4 years to use, just in case they've never had to really focus on citing their work and using APA style. So please click on that if you need help with citing anything. But for this activity, you're going to be doing career research online. You're going to either research the career that you're currently trying to get into, that you've already chosen your major, you already know what career you want, or if you're one of the ones in the class that is not quite sure yet what you're going to be going into. If there are a couple of careers, though, that you've had interest in, that you've kind of thought about and thought maybe that was something you might want to go into, go ahead and choose one of those for this assignment. And you're basically going to look up information about that career. And I give you some details here about the types of things that you need to be looking for, like what is the salary? What is the expected growth in that field? Is it expected over the next 5 years to grow by a certain percentage, or is it expected to shrink? Because there are some jobs that there's actually, over the years, they are already kind of theorizing that there's going to be less of those jobs in the future. And that's good information for you to know, because if you're going to spend 4 years in college to go after a certain career, and that career field is starting to narrow, and they're going to be hiring less people in that career, it's good information to look at right now, because sometimes that's a consideration that some people have to look at. And so this is kind of a good activity for you to really get some good details about the actual career that you're trying to get into, or one that you think is interesting that might be a possibility that you want to get into. So just read the directions here. Make sure that you are writing as many sentences as I'm asking for, etc. And then you will submit that one. And I did put a tip here to keep this assignment for the end of the semester when you have to do your final paper, because your final paper is going to be going over the career that you basically chose for this assignment, but you're going to be going into much more detail. And this will already get you a little bit ahead of the game, because if you keep this assignment in mind, you've already done a little bit of the research, and you can use the citations that you used for this assignment to help you out. And you can also use some of the information that you found. So just keep this assignment in mind for when you have to do your final paper at the end of the semester. And then there's just two more exercises that you have to do for the week, and that's it. Basically, once you get to this point where you do the career research online, this is the end of the section that I wrote, and then this rest of the avenues to learning, this from Taking the Wheel Down, was written by one of the other professors in the College Life and Strategies. So do the reading here. Some of you have expressed so far that time management is an issue that you struggle with. And so there's a lot of good information about ways that you can improve on time management. There's an activity over procrastination. It's just asking you, after you do this reading, it's asking you to answer some questions and kind of analyze yourself and ways that you could potentially try to make it better for yourself to stop procrastinating as much. So that's kind of what that activity is about. And then there's another section to read more about time. This activity here, where did all my time go? A lot of times I have students that are pretty confused about this assignment, and it is kind of confusing because they're not really sure how they're supposed to structure it. So basically, I'm going to mainly show you the directions here are pretty thorough. So read through it and just kind of, if you have any questions, send me an email and we'll try to talk it out. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to, from here down, you're going to copy this chart. So you'll just highlight it, copy it. Some of you are probably way more tech savvy than me, and you know how to do this way better than I do. But basically I copy that chart. And then when you open the text entry box, or if you decide to put it in a Microsoft Word document, you'll paste that chart into either one, and then you'll fill it out there. So just make sure you copy and paste just the chart. You don't need to copy all of this up here. You just need to copy the chart. And it's asking you to basically analyze your week. So how many hours do you spend doing certain activities? So the best and easiest way that I can explain this is take one of your typical days in a week that you do, that's kind of the most typical activities that you do pretty much every single day, and use that as your baseline. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say on average, you sleep 7 hours a night. That's pretty average. Sometimes, obviously we all sleep a little more or less, but on average, that's like what you usually sleep per night. So you can basically take that number, multiply it by 7, and then you can put your answer for the total number of hours per week. You don't necessarily have to track every single day of the week to be exact. You can just use what I'm telling you right now to kind of help you out. This says eating, preparing food. So let's say you're the type of person that, you spend 30 minutes preparing meals, and then, you sit down with your family and you guys spend another 30 minutes eating. So let's say 3 hours a day is either preparing food, eating food, spending time with your family while you're eating, whatever it is that you do, that's your normal routine. Let's say 3 hours a day is preparing food and eating. You would just multiply that by 7, and then you would put that number for the total amount of hours per week that you spend doing that activity. So you'll see that there is a bunch of different ones that are already filled in. And if they apply to you, you basically figure out how many hours per week you spend doing that. If they don't apply to you, you just put a 0. And then there is this whole section here for other. So if there are other activities that's not already listed here that you typically do in a week, you can go ahead and fill it in yourself, and then how many hours you spend per week doing that specific activity. Just please keep in mind that I don't need to know every single activity that you do throughout the week. So keep it professional. I don't need to know everything, but basically, typical activities that you do throughout the week. Cause I know that, everybody has, different hobbies, things like that. So some of these may not apply to you, and there may be some that are not there that you do typically do. So go ahead and fill them out yourself. And then basically what you're going to do is all of these numbers that you've put in this column for all the hours per week, you're going to add them all up. And you're going to get a total number of hours for the week that you spend doing all of these activities. So you get that total number, and then you have to answer these questions right here. It says, add up the total number of hours for each category so you get your total number. Subtract the total hours accumulated from 168. And the 168 is because that's how many hours there are in an entire week. So you're basically subtracting how many hours you spend doing all of these activities that you do, subtracting it from how many hours there are in a week. And you're basically trying to figure out what is the leftover amount of hours that you have available that is not spent doing all these other activities, because what we're trying to get at is for you to look at basically those are the amount of hours that you have that you could potentially devote to homework, that you could devote to studying, things like that. Because if you notice, studying and homework is not one of they have it right there. They've changed the assignment. Okay. Well, anyway, it used to be where they didn't put studying and homework on there, but they do actually have it here now. So before, we would basically use this to analyze leftover amount of hours in the week that you would have that you could potentially use for studying and whatnot. Now, I will say one thing. It's okay if you get a negative number, and I mean that by if you have all of these hours per week that you spend doing all of these different things, being honest about how many hours you think, sometimes people get a total number that is bigger than 168. And that's fine. It's typical. It happens. So basically what that's going to tell you, so if let's say you got 180 total hours per week that you spend doing all of these typical activities in a week. Okay, well, you're going to get a negative number if you subtract that from 168. And that's just basically kind of also showing you that you are spending a lot of time doing a lot of extra activities. And it's a good thing for you to look at, because it's going to show you, if you can look at some of these categories and go, okay, maybe I don't need to spend as much time talking on the phone as I do. And maybe if I cut that out and I don't talk on the phone so much, I can free up a little bit of time for me to do other things that are more important that I need to do. Leisure time, that's usually the biggest one. Things like that, television, social media. You're going to see how long you really spend doing these things if you're being honest about your answers and, how much you typically spend doing these activities. You're going to find that you're going to be able to see more in a chart format how much time you spend doing these extra activities, and you can kind of look at it and go, okay, maybe these things I don't need to do that much throughout the week, and maybe if I cut back on that, I'm going to free up more time for myself for the studying and the things like that, so I don't procrastinate, and so I have more time available for me to be able to get my work done, for me to be able to, finish my work potentially ahead of time. And then maybe I can focus on those fun activities that I want to do because I got my homework and my studying done ahead of time. But anyway, that's basically this assignment. So just go ahead, fill it out, copy and paste it, into the text entry box or Microsoft Word document, and then fill it out. You can even do it if you want to be as accurate as possible. You can even just during this week say, I'm going to track everything I do on Wednesday. And then, you can wake up on Wednesday and go, okay, I slept 8 hours. That's pretty typical, and then you can figure out how many hours per week from that. You can track how long it took you to get ready in the morning, how long it took you to prepare your meals, eat your meals. You can take an actual day and write down everything you did and how long it took you. So that way you can kind of use that information to figure out on average how long it takes you to do all of these things throughout the week. It's kind of up to you. So I'm just kind of throwing different ways that you could potentially look at this and try to figure out this project. But other than that, that is pretty much everything for week 4. If you have any questions about any of these assignments, just send me an email. We could work it out, one-on-one if you have any confusion about any of them as you're working through everything. And then next week in week 5 is when we continue more about the avenues to learning, and we go over more things like learning preferences, collaboration, diversity, things like that. And so there's actually a really cool assessment that you all are going to do next week that we've been doing for about a year now with the college life and strategies classes. And I would say at least 80% of my students like doing this assessment. There's a few of them that have either done one like it before, or they didn't like it because they didn't like the answers they got on it. But for the most part, most students really liked it because it's very useful to a lot of people when it comes to career choices, the way that you come about making decisions. It's a pretty cool assessment. So we're going to be doing that next week. All right. Well, if you have questions, email me, and otherwise, I will see you guys next week.